In this video, I'm going to be tackling the project I've personally been wanting to do since building this shop, in-the-wall hardware storage. Now, before you go freaking out on me in the comments, it's important to note that this is an interior wall. It holds 157 containers total, and it was very simple to do. So, let's get into it. This is the dividing wall between my metal shop and my woodworking shop. I started by unscrewing 2 panels on the far right of it and moving the sheets out of the way. My original plan was to rip both 4x8 sheets down the center, place the top half of the top sheet and the lower half of the bottom sheet back into place, and then have the containers in between. This would allow all containers to be within my reach when standing flat-footed on the ground. With that, I used my track saw and ripped down the boards in the middle. Then I went back to my wall and started clearing out the spray foam insulation. As I said in the intro, this is an interior wall, so I don't mind giving up the insulation here. My intent was to build a shelving system made from Dados essentially that would accept a plastic storage container I found that fit perfectly inside my wall. Okay, let's build some Dados shelves. Dados shelves? Yeah, I think that's a fitting name. To make these, I started by grabbing my dado stack and placing 1/2 inch in my table saw. I'll be using a half-lap jig made by Rocklard to make sure I can get these repeatable cuts accurate in both spacing and size. The jig is intended to be used for single pass operations, but since dado stacks don't go up to 1 inch, which is what I need the cut to be at, I did a test piece to figure out how to make it work for a 2-pass operation. I started by cutting in a rabbet on the end, then measuring over the distance I wanted between my containers and making a mark. I butted the edge of my rabbet up against the metal key, then adjusted the fence over so that my mark was in line with the blade. I pushed it through to make the cut, then moved the board over so that the fresh dado was now sitting up against the metal key, and then I continued the process. To make the second pass to enlarge the dado, I repeated the same process. I started with my rabbet, lining up the stack so that it was just outside of the first pass. Once it was cut in, I pushed the inside edge up against the metal key, then adjusted the fence on the jig so that the stack lined up perfectly for my next cut. This locks in the spacing, so now I could make the cut. Then, as long as I placed the inside edge up against that key, it would hit where I needed it to and enlarge the dado to 1 inch. Since I plan to do plenty more of these boards, I made 2 pencil marks on the top of my fence to mark each location. Also, I do have a free diagram for these on my website if you're interested. When making the dados, I left my boards wide enough to create matching pairs of shelves. To get individual shelves, I used my track saw to split it right down the middle. Doing it this way ensures that they in fact match and the slots will line up perfectly with one another. I repeated the process because the studs being 16 on center is just wide enough for 2 rows of container. In fact, it's actually just a tad bit too wide. I did a mock-up on my workbench before putting things together, and I was short by exactly 1/2 inch. That's an easy fix though. I cut a piece of 1/2 inch plywood down to the same size, and I stuck it in between the 2 inside shelves. And there, that is a perfect fit. The outside shelves are simple enough to attach as they go directly on the inside face of the studs. However, I did stick a countersink bit in my drill and pre-drill the placement holes. This way I can move my mobile workbench into place, then easily attach the unit while holding it in position. You'll see that I started off quite small, and that's because I wanted to test that this would actually work before diving in. But so far so good, I would say. Moving on to attaching the center section. For this part, I started off using pocket holes. I pulled out my armor tool jig and drilled in, about 4 holes along this length. Remember that armor made the height of the jig the same as a 2x4 so that you can easily place supports under longer work pieces. Once I drilled in the pocket holes, I did a few more countersink holes, then attached the dado shelves to the center filler piece of ply. I once again prepped by placing screws in the pockets before setting it into place, then adjusted the left and right position so that the gap was equal on both containers. Woohoo! It is working! Alrighty, theory is proven. I felt like I had a working system, so I continued on. This time, I cut dados in larger sheets that would fill up the entire length of the bay. In fact, I used the half sheet I wouldn't be placing back on the wall to make up all of my shelves, which meant that I didn't have to buy any material for this project. While I'm working on that, I want to thank this video's sponsor, which is Skillshare. If you're not already familiar, Skillshare is an online learning community with over 28,000 classes in many different categories. There are so many different courses, from starting an online business to online marketing to more creative ones such as learning to paint or leatherworking. While exploring all that Skillshare has to offer, I stumbled across this interesting circular logo design course from Aaron Draplin. Before I knew it, I learned lots of tips and tricks to create circular logo designs, which is super helpful in my business when creating things like a logo for Instagram or creating new stickers to share. So if you've been wanting to learn more in business or to explore more on the creative side, I'm sure there is a Skillshare course to help you out. For less than $10 a month, you can get a premium subscription to Skillshare and get unlimited access to their entire library of courses. And even better, Skillshare is giving the first 200 people 2 months for free. So click the link down in the description and use my code at checkout to get 2 months of Skillshare for free. Big thank you to Skillshare for supporting my channel and what I do. I repeated the process to hang things, but this time, after the first shelf went up, I used a level and a scrap piece of wood to make sure that they were truly in line with one another. Oh boy, my mom's gonna kill me when she sees I used my teeth. It turns out you're never too old to get chastised by your mama. You can see I just spanned across the distance with the wood and placed the level on top. I did the same thing when it came time to install the center section, but instead of using a piece of wood, I inserted 2 containers with the front lip poking out and placed my level across their fronts. On this one, my stud bay was just slightly off 16 center, and I didn't need the 1/2-inch spacer between my center shelves. Just noting to be sure to measure each stud bay before making your components so that you know how much to compensate, if at all. So it was when I was attaching this second long center that I started rethinking my design. I was worried that a few pocket holes wasn't going to be enough support once I had all of these containers filled. I ended up taking it down and making a flange for it instead. And this is just a piece of ply that I made a few inches wider than the shelves and attached it directly to the back with screws. To make this easier, I made a quick spacer. I not only used a spacer to align the shelves perfectly center along the length of the flange, but also as a guide on where to drill my holes so that I could hit wood and not a dado. I also used a countersink here to make sure the screws wouldn't be proud in the back surface. This is important because next I place the center section back into place and use the flange to attach it to that back wall. The next bay was exactly the same, except on this one I had a wire running down one of the studs. To compensate for this, I built some small standoffs on the back of one of the shelves. And this allowed me to straddle that wire so it wasn't crushed or in the way, but I could still attach it to the inside face. Next, I added the center support and then just repeated the process on the last bay. Now, something I wish I would have done more of, adding in small containers. These look small, but are actually a very useful size. And the box comes with a ready-made shelf. I didn't see the sense on making something new when it came with something perfectly fitting, so I just took the container to my bandsaw and chopped it up. Then I made some shelves for them to rest on. See, the rows were about 1 container too short to fit nicely between the studs. So after cutting up the rows, I also cut up 1 single row into individual cubbies so that I could add 1 cubby to each row, if that makes sense. The visual makes sense. After attaching the wooden shelves, I used some quick setting and multi-surface glue from Titebond called Thick and Quick. I placed them on the bottom of the rows, then clamped it in place for a short time to attach them. It's always surprising to me just how often these small Bessie C-clamps come to the rescue. Alright, while those were setting up, I cut and attached some flat shelves to the other stud bays. As I said in the start, I plan to use 1/2 and 1/2 of each section, but I diverted off of that plan when I opened up the wall and saw all of my wiring. Hence why I went taller than I originally expected. Alrighty, and the last finishing touch was reattaching all of the sheathing I took down and the start to cover back up the insulation parts. Then it was just a matter of filling it up. Total, this holds 142 of the larger containers and 15 of the smaller ones. although I might come back and add in more of these smaller ones. Oh, and for a labeling system, I kept it very easy and adjustable. Instead of a label on the outside, when I emptied a hardware box inside of a container, I simply cut out what it was, stuck it inside the container, and faced it outwards. Now I'll be able to easily see what it is I need, pull out an entire container, and take it to wherever I'm working. Now, I imagine that people are going to say that this is a lot, but remember whenever you're building storage solutions, that if you build it to your current inventory, it's already too small. If you're going to go through the effort of a project, go ahead and build in some extra room for growth. I hope that you've enjoyed this project. More than that, I hope that it's inspired you to get out into your own shop and organize a section of it. Leave me your comments on what you think down below, and I will see you on whatever I'm building next.